I don't know how many of you guys know Jimmy Dore. He is, I would consider him to be kind of like a tolerable version of Bill Maher. I do like Bill Maher, but he can be a bit much because I don't think he knows where he stands yet. Jimmy Dore is a leftist comedian who pretty much has come to the conclusion that the Democratic Party is not the friend of free speech, and it's an incredible danger because of its affinity to the war machine. Uh, I find him more tolerable in that he's more consistent. I think he's figured out where he's at. If you end up listening to his videos, uh, it's Jimmydor, and I think you'll find him interesting. There'll be points where you disagree with him because he still has. He's a true liberal with a little bit of progressive light tastes. But even the stuff you disagree with him on, he's not obnoxious about. So I think that's pretty neat about. So I'm using the term benevolent communism in the title. He never actually says that, and I don't want to infer he did. I want to play you a little clip he said, and that's what we're going to talk about tonight. So we're doing a few different things here, so bear with me if I have some fumbling with the controls.
I don't know what they mean by communist fiscal policies. There's
Oh,
nothing she's doing that's going to help the worker.
well, she's not going to tell you. It's going to be what Theo said to Bernie Sanders.
So it's like a privatized communism.
They're all for it. They're all for it. It's
if they mean
worst.
Communism means central power dictating what happens without an input from the people, then yes, I would agree. If they mean that kind of private, but I always thought communism meant like the workers, but they mean a different type of communism.
It's like putting natural flavors on the label.
Yeah, they mean communism
mean
like
that.
An authoritarian, top-down, central kind of government deciding kind of thing.
So, kind of interesting, huh? And what I find kind of, and maybe even a little confusing. So, I consider what I like about Jimmy Dore is I believe everything coming out of his mouth is something he actually he believes. I don't think he's trying to lead you astray or come up with something. And what he ends up saying in the video, hopefully you caught the same part I did, where he seemed really confused by the idea of the JFK campaign, or no, not really their campaign now because they're working for Trump, but their campaign inferring that the Harris campaign is attempting to implement communism. And, if you are on the right or lean right, or you just have a cursory understanding of communism, you might find this very strange. But in all honesty, what we're seeing here is a non-snarky version of that wasn't real communism. Quote, that wasn't real communism. And so this kind of changes my perspective on a few things because pretty much all my life when I've heard people do the whole that wasn't real communism thing, I assume for the most part they knew what they were saying was incorrect and that it was basically a deliberate attempt to mislead people. Now, a lot of the academia and where the idea of basically the way the communism, socialism, and all this other stuff is pigeonholed is deliberate obfuscation. But clearly, if someone like Jimmy Dore sees this place where he kind of shrugs off communism and says, it's empowering the workers. I don't know. It doesn't seem like power to the workers type thing. Like it's kind of a positive thing. So some of this I actually kind of really already knew, but it's one of those things, who really wants to go digging into communist theory? I mean, history shown pretty solidly it hasn't worked and probably won't. But what I've done for you for this evening is I've dug into a little bit of the communism so we can understand where Jimmy Dore is coming from, and maybe a lot of other people in his camp, the honest ones. I don't give a damn about the people who are basically trying to mislead us, because we do need to build bridges with the people who are anti-war. We do need to build bridges with the people who are absolute free speech people like this. And clearly, with the election coming up, we see a transition where various groups from what we consider the left and the right seem to be coming together on these things. So let's this one.
I don't know what they.
Oops, sorry, wrong one. Pardon me on that. Okay, so and this is an example where people on the right really fail miserably by misusing words that they either know the meaning of or haven't bothered to know the meaning of. And this is something I've been kind of beating the drum on in videos in terms of like liberalism versus progressivism. They're two very different things. Liberals are people, if their vision came true, wouldn't be that horrific, whereas progressivism is a malevolent force. So to conflate the two is alienating to the group that could potentially be an ally. So let's dig into our terminology, getting into a little bit of communism. And what we're going to do is break down very briefly socialism, Marxism, Leninism, and Stalinism. So socialism, and this is something I've talked about before, the idea is that people try to make it out to be Marxist creation when it never was. The idea of socialism predates the French Revolution by a little bit. So this idea came out because France at the time, an overwhelming majority of the property was owned by the kings, the king and his court, basically the state, because the king was the state. A lot of it was owned by the nobility, and a lot of it was owned by the church. So the idea of socialism in their mindset was taking these assets, mostly land, but to a certain extent buildings and industry, take them out of the hands of the government, take them out of the hands of the church and the nobility, and basically privatize and collectivize, sort of. But that's the general idea. So it's kind of interesting that modern socialists kind of invert it, where it's like take everything back into the hands of the government in a form of collectivization. So let's get into the differences between Marx, Lenin, and Stalin. Now, for the talk here, I'm going on the assumption that all of them were aiming for the eventual communist ideal state. I don't think that's necessarily true, but this is what we're going to assume just to keep this all clean and nice. So with Marx, going through his phases of communism, he would believe that late stage capitalism creates class conflict, which would evolve into a proletariat revolution, and the proletariat basically being the workers. The dictatorship of the proletariat begins the process of dismantling class and property. Now, in Marx's usage, he's not actually talking about a dictatorship being placed on top of the proletariat. He's talking about the proletariat being the dictatorship itself. Basically kind of a super democratic form where they may or may not use representation, but everybody's kind of involved. And then it evolves into a socialist central government. And essentially, this socialist central government is a democratic representation of the workers' will. This government has the purpose of continuing the work that the dictatorship of the proletariat couldn't do. This government is meant to dismantle the remaining class distinctions, redistribute wealth, and safeguard the revolution from counter-revolution. And then it paves the way for the withering of the state. And then in the very end, we have communism, anarchy. Essentially, the people's communes take collective control of the factories, mines, agriculture, and the workers act as the decision makers of how it's all run. Now, when we think back to the transitional government I was just talking about, the idea that all the workers control it and essentially it's this hyper democratic organ, it has kind of a hippy dippy kumbaya kind of feeling to it. But the one thing you got to keep in mind is that Marx would not likely have been surprised at the level of violence Lenin would end up committing in Russia. Marx understood that in order to implement his vision, a lot of people were going to have to die. When Marx says revolution, he means violent revolution. The idea of peaceful revolution wasn't really something that was used at this time. Now, what happens in the wake of Marx? First thing happens is there were actual people who were anarchists who did not like socialism. And they liked the idea of the end phase of communism. So they saw it as identical to their idea of anarchism. But what happened is after a few major meetings, the international meetings, the anarchists said, it won't work. They said, as soon as you have a central government set up to finish the task of dismantling everything, that government will never want to relinquish power. And clearly the anarchists are correct. I do have some videos on anarchy out there if you want to check them out. Now, the people who cause the next major schism are the social democrats. And we see people in the Europe, there's actual social democrat parties, and a lot of them formed in the wake of the 1848 revolutions. We do have a nascent democratic socialist group forming in this country. Cortez is definitely a member of it. Bernie, not quite as much, but pretty closely aligned. They basically saw that Marx's predictions of organic revolution coming out of late stage industrial capitalism wasn't happening. They got an opportunity to slowly co-opt things via a democratic method, and they took it, and the democratic socialists and the Marxists hated each other to the bitter end after that. Now, the fun part is, if it weren't for Lenin, Marxism probably would have disappeared. Basically, as time went on, more and more people are saying this isn't happening. Whatever Marx predicted appears to be wrong. So Lenin ends up picking up the baton and says, well, we have to reinterpret things because clearly this didn't work, so I had to put my spin on it. So Lenin's stuff follows roughly the same pattern as Marx, but Lenin doesn't trust the organic nature of things. In his mind, the process has to be guided. He believes the revolution will not happen naturally, but has to be fomented. He abandons Marx's late-stage capitalism theory, saying that he thinks the revolution can be forced to happen in semi-feudal countries, i.e., like Russia. His major conception and huge break away from Marx is the idea of the vanguard party. In Lenin's idea, the vanguard party is a highly disciplined, centralized party to guide the revolution and revolution and through all the various stages to the end of communism. So, for Lenin, the dictatorship of the proletariat, instead of being this hippy-dippy workers' confab, he opts to impose a strong central government from above rather than the formation of a Marxist democratic workers' collective. Then, in the next portion, where essentially the workers create a central government to continue the process, his vanguard party carries forward and becomes the central government that implements socialism. They're there to dismantle the old system. They're there to suppress the counter-revolution. Now, another break that Lenin has is the internationalization of Russia versus the world. So Lenin came to the conclusion that his communist revolution could never fully work as long as there were other countries that weren't communist. So even in the midst of his own revolution, he was training cadres of internationalists to go abroad and try to trigger revolutions elsewhere. So essentially, he was looking to foment global revolution in every country. Now, when the revolution gets close to its end, Lenin implements basically the abrogation of property and money. And without property or money, he discovered the economy disappeared. The famous quote, I believe, is, when they got to that point, we were looking into the abyss. In order to bring them back from the abyss, he introduced limited capitalist market functions. This essentially allowing the people who were on the land to act as their property owners and to do a limited amount of market selling and buying in order to keep food flowing, because without the food, there was no country. Now, as things went along, he began to centralize the party and government in a way that was far more authoritarian than his written theories. I suspect that this was not his plan all along to basically make things more authoritarian. It's likely because reality intervened, forcing him to. Now, there's a lot of people who apologize for Lenin, saying, hey, he wasn't that bad. Well, compared to Stalin, he wasn't that bad, but he was. I mean, he was involved in killing a lot of people, ordering people to their deaths. And a lot of the people he ordered to their deaths, it wasn't like they were killed humanely. They were killed in horrible ways. It's just Stalin figured out how to do it on a better scale. So what happens with Stalinism? Well, Stalin comes up with the idea, and essentially what happened is Lenin passed away and Stalin worked his way into power. Stalin's idea was socialism in one country. And what that meant is he believed that the trying to foment worldwide revolution was beyond the capability of what they could do. They needed to concentrate their resources at home in order to fulfill the revolution. So this caused some schisms. You may have heard of Trotsky. He was one of the internationalists. Stalin believed he needed to purge the internationalist clique, which he did. Stalin believed that Lenin was putting the dependence of the revolution on uncontrollable outside forces. He believed that if he centralized the government and party some more, they could use those same resources to focus security on internal order. Part of that being is if people from other countries came in to mess with their revolution, they would have the security in place to get them out of the way and keep the revolution protected. Lenin's new economic policy allowed for these capitalist pockets, especially in agriculture. Stalin saw this as creating a new class. These were known as the kulaks. These are the same people who, a lot of them were Ukrainians that were killed in the Holodomor. Stalin's solutions to problems, to eliminate a problem, meant eliminating lots of people. So to prevent this class from forming, he destroyed it. He struck out very strongly against the kulaks. One of the things that Lenin also allowed was within the party, let's say something had not been decided. Lenin was very much okay with the idea of lots of debate before a decision. However, once a decision was made, he expected strict adherence afterwards. Stalin saw this as leading to factionalism. So Stalin eliminated this debate and factions, sometimes the good old-fashioned way by actually just killing people. Now, Lenin intended that his government would transition from centralized socialism to stateless communism, if we are to believe that's his goal. However, at every point, and this is Lenin, because of what was going on, Lenin kept centralizing things rather than spreading out the decision-making process. And this is because every time events occurred, things appeared to be on the verge of spinning out of control. Stalin, on the other hand, believed that the ability to transition to communism was much further in the future than what Lenin had thought. And that Stalin believed that further centralization was needed to protect the socialist state from threats inside and outside. Now, that's kind of a sanitary way of putting things, but in general, that's the academic way of looking at things. Ultimately, all socialism leads to violence. Democratic socialism just spreads it out over a much longer period of time, so it appears much more benevolent. So if we do ever want to talk about why socialism, communism has to be violent, I can do that in another video. What do you think of Jimmy Dore? What do you think of what Jimmy Dore was saying about communism and am I correct? Was his bafflement at the use of communism genuine? Also, were you aware of these little breakdowns between socialism, Marxism, Leninism, and Stalinism? Any thoughts on that? And if you want me to spread out and go into depth on any of these, please let me know. In the comments below, that is. Please smash the like button. If the YouTube algorithm's brought you here and you're not a regular subscriber, check out my other titles. I'm sure you'll find a lot you can listen to. Consider subscribing. And of course, if anybody you know might find this interesting, share it with them. So thank you for spending time with me this evening. Hope to see you again in a future video.